The boy was halfway through practice when his mother walked onto the basketball court, looked straight at me, and whispered, "You don't remember me, do you?" I laughed nervously because I was certain I had never seen her before, but then she said the one sentence that made my entire body go cold. 22 years ago, you promised my little brother you would never leave him." Before I could ask what she meant, she placed an old photograph in my hand, and the face staring back at me was someone I had spent half my life trying to forget. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. My name is Ethan Calloway, and for most of my adult life, I had convinced myself that the past was something you survived by refusing to look at it. I was 39, living in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, working as a physical education teacher and volunteering as an assistant basketball coach at a local community center. Basketball had been the one constant in my life. It had given me discipline when I was angry, direction when I was lost, and something to believe in when believing in myself felt impossible. I wasn't famous, wealthy, or particularly special. I was simply the man who stayed late after practice to help a nervous kid make 10 free throws, the coach who kept extra sneakers in his trunk for players whose families couldn't afford new ones, and the adult who always told his team that talent could open a door, but character determined whether you deserved to walk through it. That was how I met 14-year-old Caleb Mercer. He joined our summer youth league 3 days after his mother registered him. He was tall for his age, painfully thin, and carried himself with the strange combination of confidence and insecurity I had seen in countless teenagers. His basketball skills were obvious, but he had one problem: he wouldn't pass. Every possession became a battle between Caleb and the rest of the team. He would dribble through 3 defenders, lose the ball, and then glare at everyone as though they had betrayed him. After the 3rd practice, I pulled him aside and told him that basketball wasn't about proving you were better than everybody else. It was about trusting people enough to let them help you win. He stared at the floor and quietly said, "Trusting people usually gets you hurt." Something about the way he said it bothered me, but I didn't push him. Over the next month, Caleb became one of the players I worked with most closely. Every weekday afternoon, while the other kids rushed toward the parking lot, he stayed behind. We worked on footwork, passing, defense, and free throws. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he changed. He started encouraging younger players. He passed instead of forcing shots. One afternoon, after his team won a close scrimmage because Caleb gave up the final shot to a teammate, he smiled for the first time in weeks. I remember telling him, "That's what a real leader looks like." He shrugged as though it didn't matter, but I saw the pride in his eyes. His mother, Mara Mercer, usually waited in an old silver sedan near the entrance. She rarely came inside. She would wave at Caleb, sometimes speak briefly with him, and then leave. I noticed that she always watched me from a distance. At first I assumed she was simply evaluating the coach responsible for her son, but there was something different about her expression. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. And every time our eyes met, she seemed to look away as if she were afraid I might remember something. The first strange moment happened during the 3rd week. Caleb had injured his wrist, and I called Mara to tell her he needed to rest it. When she arrived, she thanked me, then paused beside the court. Her eyes traveled over my face, and for a second her expression became almost unbearably sad. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but instead she simply whispered, "You really don't remember me." I thought she was talking about meeting at some point before, so I apologized and told her I met hundreds of parents through school and community programs. She smiled faintly and said, "I know." Then she walked away. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That evening, I searched my memory for her face, but nothing came. I remembered high school, college, my first teaching job, my parents' divorce, and the years after my father's death. I remembered almost everything except the people I had deliberately pushed away. There was one period of my life I never discussed with anyone. When I was 17, my family fell apart after my father was arrested for financial fraud. We lost our home, my mother moved away, and I spent my final year of high school living with an aunt. During those months, I had one close friend named Daniel. He was 15, lived in a trailer park on the other side of town, and had a little sister he adored. Daniel and I played basketball together almost every day. Then, one summer morning, his family disappeared. I was told they had moved. I never saw him again. I had forgotten the little sister's name. Until Mara walked onto that court. It happened on the final Friday of the month. The team was preparing for a weekend tournament, and Caleb was playing the best basketball of his life. Near the end of practice, I noticed Mara standing alone by the entrance. She wasn't watching Caleb anymore. She was watching me. When the other players left, she walked slowly across the empty court carrying a small envelope. She stopped a few feet away and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" This time there was no smile. I shook my head. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a photograph, faded around the edges. It showed 3 teenagers sitting on a cracked basketball court. I recognized myself immediately. Beside me was Daniel. Between us was a little girl with crooked braids and an enormous grin. The girl was Mara. My knees nearly gave out. She watched my face as the memory came crashing back. Mara had been 8 years old when I knew her. She used to sit beside the court and watch Daniel and me play. She would chase our basketball whenever it rolled away and beg us to let her shoot. One afternoon, Daniel had told me he was terrified because his mother planned to send Mara to live with relatives. Their family was drowning in debt. Their father had disappeared, and their mother was working 2 jobs. Daniel had cried that day, something I had never seen him do before. I had put my hand on his shoulder and promised him that no matter what happened, I would find a way to stay in his life. But then my own life collapsed. My family moved. My phone was disconnected. I never found Daniel. And I never kept my promise. Mara's voice trembled as she told me what happened next. Her family hadn't simply moved. They had been evicted. Daniel had left school to work odd jobs and help their mother. A few months later, he was killed in a highway accident while driving home from work. He was 16. I couldn't breathe. Mara told me she had spent years wondering whether I knew what happened. She had been angry with me because Daniel had believed I would come looking for him. Then, years later, she discovered that I had tried. I had sent letters to their old address. I had called numbers that no longer worked. I had even asked around at school. The letters had never reached them. "You weren't the one who abandoned us," she said. But I needed to hate someone. Those words destroyed me more than any accusation could have. I sat on the edge of the court with the photograph in my hands and felt 17 again. I remembered Daniel laughing after I missed an easy shot. I remembered him saying his sister would become a better player than both of us. I remembered promising him that one day we'd have our own team. Then I remembered how quickly life had separated us, how young and powerless we had been, and how many years I had spent believing that forgetting was easier than grieving. But there was another secret Mara hadn't told me. Caleb wasn't just her son. He was Daniel's grandson. Daniel had a daughter before he died. Mara had raised her, and Caleb was that girl's son. Daniel had never gotten to meet him. I stared at Caleb through the glass doors as he waited outside with his basketball tucked beneath his arm. Suddenly, everything made sense. The stubbornness. The fear of trusting people. The way he reacted whenever someone talked about family. The reason Mara had watched every practice from a distance. She hadn't enrolled Caleb merely because he needed basketball. She had brought him to me because she wanted to know whether the boy's great-uncle's old friend was still the kind of man Daniel remembered. I asked her why she had waited a month. She said she needed to be sure. Sure of what? That you weren't just pretending to be kind. That sentence hurt because I understood it. She had watched me coach Caleb. She had watched whether I treated him differently because of his talent, whether I embarrassed him when he failed, whether I praised him when he sacrificed the spotlight for someone else. She had been looking for the boy I used to be. And perhaps she had found him. The next morning, Caleb arrived early for the tournament. He looked nervous. I pulled him aside and told him that there was something I wanted him to know about his family. I didn't tell him every painful detail at once. Mara and I agreed that he deserved the truth without being buried beneath it. We told him about Daniel, the teenager who had loved basketball, who had protected his family, and who had died far too young. We showed him the photograph. Caleb stared at it for a long time. Then he asked, "Was he good?" I smiled through tears and said, "He was stubborn. He talked too much. He couldn't defend anyone without fouling. But he was one of the bravest people I ever knew." Caleb looked at the photograph again and whispered, "I wish I could have met him." Mara reached for his hand. I watched them and realized that grief doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it waits patiently for a new generation to give it somewhere to go. That afternoon, Caleb played in the tournament. In the final minute, our team was down by 1. The ball came to him. Everyone expected him to shoot. Instead, he passed it to a younger teammate standing completely open beneath the basket. The boy scored, and the gym erupted. Caleb didn't celebrate immediately. He looked toward Mara. Then he looked at me. And smiled. After the game, Mara walked toward me holding the old photograph. She said she had carried it for 22 years because she didn't know where else to put the memories. Then she handed it to me. "I think Daniel would have wanted you to have it," she said. I shook my head. "No. I think Caleb should have it." She looked surprised. I told her that photographs weren't meant to preserve guilt. They were meant to preserve love. Daniel shouldn't be remembered as the person I failed to find. He should be remembered as the boy who believed his little sister deserved a better life, the friend who made people laugh when he was struggling, and the young man whose love continued through generations. Mara began crying. So did I. For 22 years, I had believed that some promises were impossible to keep once life had taken everything away. But standing there beside that basketball court, I finally understood that promises can survive even when people don't. Sometimes they return in unexpected forms. Sometimes they arrive as a teenager with a basketball tucked beneath his arm. Sometimes they stand in front of you after decades and ask whether you remember. And sometimes, the answer isn't about remembering a face. It's about remembering who you were when that person needed you. A few weeks later, Mara and Caleb invited me to their home for dinner. There was an old framed photograph of Daniel on the living room shelf. Caleb had started playing basketball differently. He still loved scoring, but now he loved helping his teammates score even more. Mara told me she had forgiven me, not because the past had changed, but because carrying anger had become too heavy. I told her I was sorry I hadn't found them sooner. She said, "Maybe you weren't supposed to find us then. Maybe you were supposed to find us when you were finally ready to understand what you lost." I thought about that sentence for days. Because she was right. We often imagine second chances arriving dramatically, with perfect timing and clear answers. But real second chances are usually quieter. They look like showing up for practice. They look like listening to a teenager who doesn't know how to explain his pain. They look like forgiving someone who never meant to hurt you. They look like allowing an old wound to become a bridge instead of a prison. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. I still coach Caleb, and sometimes, when practice ends and the sunlight stretches across the empty court, he asks me stories about Daniel. I tell him everything I can remember, the terrible jokes, the missed shots, the arguments, the dreams, and the way Daniel always looked after his little sister. Caleb listens carefully, as if every memory is a piece of a family history he was supposed to inherit. And every time he walks away carrying his basketball, I am reminded of something I wish I had understood when I was 17. We don't always get to choose when people enter or leave our lives, but we do get to choose what we do with the love they leave behind. Sometimes life takes people from us before we are ready. Sometimes it separates friends without giving us a chance to say goodbye. Sometimes we spend years blaming ourselves for things we were too young or powerless to change. But forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply stops the past from stealing the future. And perhaps the greatest gift of a second chance is not getting another opportunity to change what happened yesterday. It is getting the chance to love someone better today. If you want, I can continue the story focusing on Ethan's evolving relationship with Caleb and Mara, summarize key themes and lessons from Ethan's story about promises, forgiveness, and second chances, create a checklist of emotional stages Ethan experiences throughout the story.